I left her to die in the forest. Weeks later, she came back, and what she brought with her still makes my hands shake. When I saw her lying there in the thin morning light, her flank heaving with ragged breaths, my heart slammed against my ribs because I realized she was not afraid. I froze, rifle still warm in my hands, as that wounded lynx met my gaze with eyes too steady for one so hurt. Her tawny fur was matted with blood and dirt. Her paw was twisted beneath her, a broken angle that should have sent her into terrified flight. But she stayed. She watched me, and I watched her. My lungs burned with shock. I lowered my rifle slowly, too slowly to be sure of anything. The forest around us held its breath. Every bird and branch seemed to wait. She blinked once, her eyes locked onto mine again. There was a strange intelligence there, a recognition. I swallowed hard, tasting pine and fear. I should have taken aim. I should have ended her suffering quickly, but I could not. I could not look away. Each labored exhale from her chest made my own breath catch. Time stretched. I knelt on the fallen leaves and hewn bark. My hands trembled. I told myself I was a hunter. I had seen death before, but never like this. She lay so still, yet so alive. There was no tremor of panic in her body, only pain and wonder. We were strangers, yet in that instant our lives became interwoven. Something ancient clicked inside me. I felt it in my bones. All the lessons I thought I'd learned about the wild shattered. I was not the master here. She was not the prey. She was something else. I whispered her name, though I did not know what it was. "Easy now," I said, voice thick with disbelief. She did not flinch. She only watched. I closed my eyes for a moment, tasting tears I refused to let fall. When I opened them again, she was still there, still looking at me. I stood, leaving my rifle by a fallen log. I reached out, almost touching her muzzle. I thought I could feel her pulse under her coarse fur. I considered gathering her in my arms, carrying her back to my cabin 3 miles from here, but instinct warned me against it. I would only chase her spirit back into terror. So I stepped away. I turned my back to the wounded lynx and walked. Every step felt heavier than the last. My boots sank into mud and leaves. My mind replayed her gaze over and over. I could still see the understanding in those amber eyes. I could still feel the shock in my chest. I convinced myself I had done the right thing. I convinced myself she would not survive the night. I told myself she would slip away quietly. I told myself I would forget this moment by morning. But I did not. I did not forget. I did not sleep. And I did not look back. I thought that was it. I thought that was the end. But I was wrong. In her eyes there was no fear, only understanding. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. When I first saw her, it was like waking from a dream into a sharper one. I was refilling the water trough by the edge of my property, the late afternoon sun slanting gold through the pines, when I sensed movement at the tree line. I turned, and there she stood, slender, silent, every muscle taut beneath her tawny coat. She had the same steady stare, the same unblinking focus as before, but now there was something else. Distance. My heart lurched. My breath caught in my throat. I froze mid-step, the metal bucket swinging in my hand. The lynx did not move. She simply watched me from where she'd paused, as if testing whether I was real. Then, almost imperceptibly, 2 small shapes emerged behind her. Padded footsteps so soft I could barely hear them over my pounding pulse. 2 kits, barely big enough to clear her haunches, tumbled into the clearing. One pressed close to her side, nuzzling under her chin. The other investigated the fallen branches at her paws. I stood there, motionless, riveted by the sight. For weeks I had convinced myself she was gone forever, funeral woodland ceremony and all. I had whispered to the wind that she would not make it, that nature had decided, but there she was, healthy and strong, flanked by her young. I could not speak, could not move, could not breathe. My hands shook so badly I let the bucket clatter to the ground, water spilling across dead needles. The kits paused, looking up at me, innocent eyes reflecting fading daylight. She took a single step forward, no more than a pace, her eyes never leaving mine. Then she turned her head, as if offering her offspring a choice: come forward or stay hidden. The bolder kid obeyed, soft paws padding into the open. He stopped a few feet from me and sniffed the air, nostrils flaring. I swallowed, tasting copper and pine. My mind raced for explanations, wildlife corridors, instinct, miracle, but none of them fit. This was something beyond logic. I felt tears prickle behind my eyes. She straightened, tail flicking once. A sound, soft, almost inaudible, escaped her throat. I realized too late that it was a call, a summons. The second kit hesitated, then bounded after the first, emerging fully into view. They stood together, small and vulnerable, and yet astonishingly brave. The mother lynx held her ground, unwavering. I felt a tremor of guilt slice through me. I had walked away from her when she was broken. Here she was repaying my indifference by showing me her strength. My chest tightened, my vision blurred. I could not reconcile the hunter I had been with the witness I had become. She flicked her ears, as if reminding me of something I had long forgotten. With deliberate slowness, she lowered herself into a graceful crouch, nose almost brushing the ground. The kits mirrored her stance. In that moment, it was as if she was teaching them, teaching me about survival, about resilience, about the unspoken bonds that tie us all. I exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I took a cautious step forward, but the mother shifted her weight and rose, stern in her command. Stay back. I halted. I thought she was just passing through, a fleeting ghost of the wild. I thought she would vanish as quickly as she had appeared, leaving footprints behind and no more. But watching those three lynxes standing in a rough semicircle around me, I realized she had come back for a reason. She had come to show me something I had never imagined, that life could win where it was supposed to lose, that gratitude could flow in the direction of the predator, that memory was not the sole domain of human hearts. Her gaze softened, just for a heartbeat, and then she turned. The kits followed without a glance backward, slipping into the shadows of the forest. I watched them go, my throat tight, tears now spilling free. When the last kit disappeared, she paused at the edge of the clearing, tush flicking once, and looked at me one final time. In her eyes there was no anger, no fear, only recognition. She remembers, I thought, my voice a whisper in the hush of the pines. Then she melted into the woods, leaving me alone with the echo of her lesson and the undeniable proof that I had been wrong. I thought she was just passing through, I murmured to the empty air, but she came back to show me she survived and that she was never truly alone. Again, I didn't see them coming. One clear morning, just after dawn, I stepped outside my cabin to fetch firewood and found her at the edge of the porch, Mother Lynx, flanked by her two kits, sleek shapes outlined by pale mist. They didn't bolt. They didn't skitter back into the trees. Instead, they regarded me with calm curiosity, as though I had always been part of their world. Over the next few days, they returned at dawn and dusk. I'd catch flashes of tawny fur slipping through the pines, then pause on the porch to find them watching from the mossy stones. No fear in their eyes, only that same unshakable intelligence. I began to leave scraps of venison at the cabin steps, small slivers of meat wrapped in leaves as though offering tribute to some royal court. Each morning, the food was gone. Then, on the fifth morning, the smaller kit ventured closer than I'd ever seen. He padded forward on delicate paws, ears tilted forward, nostrils quivering. I stood so still I thought I might merge with the cabin itself. He came within arm's reach, a small predator, but I was afraid like a child. Every instinct screamed at me to back away, to slam the door and hide behind walls of wood. Yet I stayed rooted, heart pounding. His mother sat a few yards back, alert but relaxed. The older kid fidgeted, glancing between mother and me, uncertain. I realized then that this wasn't about hunger. They were testing me. They wanted to know if I was friend or foe. For the first time since finding that wounded lynx, I understood. She had chosen me. I laid the venison shard on the worn boards and took a half step back. The small kit hesitated, sniffing the air, then seized the offering with kittenish greed. His jaws were gentle around the meat's edge, as though unsure how to handle something so precious. I exhaled, long and slow, relief coursing through my veins. They visited every day that week. In the fading light, I'd stand at the threshold, hands stuffed into my coat pockets to still the trembling. She never approached closer than 15 feet, but her kits came to within 5. One kit even brushed his flank against my boot once, warm fur brushing denim. I froze, breath stuck in my throat. Could such a wild thing truly trust me? Still, part of me balked at the thought of reward. I'd told myself I was no stranger to wildlife. I was the hunter turned hermit, immune to sentiment. I'd insisted this was coincidence, a curious run of luck or anomaly in animal behavior. I decided it was just coincidence, nothing more, a fleeting friendliness born of food. I would not let my heart be ensnared, but each morning, when I found empty plates and saw their shapes fading into the trees, I felt a pang of loss, like saying goodbye to a friend I'd barely met. I started marking days on the cabin door with notches, waiting for their return. One dawn, as mist curled around the pines, I dared to leave water in a shallow basin beside the meat. The mother drank carefully, graceful tongue lapping. The kits splashed wildly, dripping dew across the boards. I knelt nearby, heart hammering. They didn't flee, they didn't growl. They simply regarded me, as though granting me permission to share their world. That evening, I lit the lantern and sat on the porch, notebook open on my lap. I scribbled words I would never share. I am terrified and honored. I am alive in a way I never was before. In their eyes, I saw reflections of all I had tried to bury: guilt, wonder, regret. They brought them back, unbidden. When I finally rose to go inside, I heard a soft scrape on the doorframe. The small kit stood at the threshold, head cocked. He paused, sniffed my leg, then turned and bounded back to his mother. They melted into shadow, leaving me alone with my thundering chest and the echo of paws disappearing. I closed the door and leaned against the cool wood, tears stinging my eyes. I understood now that this bond, fragile as it was, had already changed me. I could no longer claim indifference. I could no longer pretend I was anything but humbled by their trust. And yet, I could not shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, I had imagined it all. Maybe the food had been the only reason they came. Maybe tomorrow they would not return. He came within arm's reach, a small predator, but I was afraid like a child. I turned out the lantern and waited, listening for the soft crack of a paw step I hoped would come again. I stepped out before sunrise, the chill of dawn biting through my coat. The forest was silent, too silent. A low growl shattered the stillness. My heart seized. I turned toward the sound and saw it. Silver fur bristling, teeth bared, eyes like shards of ice. A lone wolf crouched behind a fallen pine, its gaze fixed on me. I froze, every muscle locked in fear. My breath hitched in my throat. I knew the stories of wolves, silent hunters, ruthless shadows that slipped through the night. This one was no exception. He edged closer, growl rumbling deep in his chest. His hackles rose. My pulse pounded in my ears. I thought of my cabin miles away, safe behind locked doors. But I was alone here, Half a step closer, and he would strike. My legs trembled, my mind screamed to run, but my feet stayed rooted. The wolf snarled, low and threatening. His fangs glinted in the half-light. I raised my hands, trembling to appear larger, a futile gesture. His lips curled back, saliva dripped onto moss. I tasted copper in my mouth, my chest constricted. I was certain I would not see another sunrise. Then, from the shadows, a flash of tawny fur. A shape blurred past me. My shoulder brushed something soft and warm. My blood froze. I'd never seen her so fearless. The adolescent lynx stepped into the clearing. Her amber eyes met the wolf's icy stare. She crouched, spine arched, claws brushing the earth. She didn't snarl. She didn't hiss. She simply stood her ground. Between me and the predator, time seemed to slow. The wolf paused, ears swiveling toward his unexpected challenger. He studied her for a long moment. She held his gaze, unwavering. Then, without a sound, he took a step back. His growl faded. He turned and melted into the trees. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My legs gave way beneath me, and I sank to the moss. The lynx, no bigger than a large dog, sidled up to me. She nudged my hand with her head, whiskers brushing my fingers. I managed a shaky laugh. Tears blurred my vision. I was sure that this was my last morning. The lynx blinked at me, amber eyes soft now. She pressed closer, as if checking I was still breathing. I reached out and gently stroked her flank. Her fur was coarse but warm. My hand shook, but she did not flinch. She simply allowed me this small comfort. I looked around, but the wolf was gone. Only the echo of his warning growl lingered in the damp air. I thought of all the mornings I had walked these woods alone, never once expecting to be protected, never once imagining a wild heart would risk itself for mine. She didn't growl, she just stood beside me. And that was enough. I sat there for a long time, leaning against a fallen log, with her head resting in my lap. The first light of dawn filtered through the branches, painting her fur in hues of gold. I felt a swell of gratitude so fierce it brought tears to my eyes. I stroked her head and whispered thanks I wasn't sure she understood. She purred, a sound so deep and unexpected that my ribs vibrated with its resonance. I closed my eyes, savoring the moment. The warmth of her body, the hush of the forest, the fragile peace we shared. When I finally stood, she slipped away into the trees without a backward glance. I watched until she vanished. Then I turned and walked home, boots sinking into frost-soft earth. Every step felt lighter than the last. I carried with me the memory of her courage and the knowledge that I was no longer entirely alone in these woods. And though I would tell myself later that it was just luck, that she was merely curious, I knew the truth in my bones. She came for me. I sit at my workbench long after the lantern's glow has faded, pencil hovering over rough paper, and wonder how any of this could be real. The lines I've sketched, the curve of her haunch, the tilt of her head, that impossible intelligence gleaming in her eyes, feel more vivid than anything I've ever lived. I've never believed in miracles, never believed that wild beasts could forge bonds with humans. All my life, I trusted only what I could see, what I could track, what I could hunt. Nature was a puzzle to solve, a territory to master. But now I stare at those half-finished strokes on my drawing pad and think, maybe I just didn't know how to look before. At night, sleep eludes me. The mattress creaks as I shift, and every shadow against the window becomes a tawny shape. I dream of amber eyes watching me from under fallen pines, of soft paws padding across frost-hardened earth. I wake with my heart hammering, convinced I hear a gentle nudge against the door. But in the cold dawn light, only emptiness greets me. I close my eyes and recall the first time she appeared that morning. The kits were gone, just her, slim and silent, stepping through the mist. I remember how my breath caught as she paused at the tree line, as if weighing me with her gaze. I trace her outline on the page, but the memory bleeds beyond the paper's edge. The weight of gratitude, the ache of guilt. I have never felt so alive and so guilty. Guilty for the way I abandoned her when she lay broken in the underbrush. Guilty that I believed her spirit was extinguished, only to discover it blazing brighter than ever. I wonder if she forgave me that day, or if she returned simply because the wild calls to its own, regardless of our failures. I run a hand through my hair and lean back, pencil tapping as I consider my life before the Lynx. Solitude was my refuge. Certainty was my comfort. I had read every wildlife journal, examined every behavior note, but I never understood that emotion could flow between species, that instinct could be steered by something like appreciation or wonder. The forest outside my window sighs with its usual rhythms, wind through needles, distant branch snaps, but to me it sings a new song, a hymn of reciprocity and respect. Each rustle now feels like a greeting, each footprint like a message. I set aside the drawing and rise, boots calling softly across the floor. I step outside, chest tight with the need to see, to listen, to feel. The world is cool and still, and I imagine her silhouette slipping among the trunks. I call her name in a whisper, unsure if I'm speaking to her or to my own heart. For a moment, nothing happens. Then a breeze stirs, carrying a scent I recognize, earth and pine and the faintest trace of wild fur. My pulse quickens. I thought I'd never see her again. My breath catches. I see movement at the edge of the clearing, the lynx emerging from shadows like a drawing come to life. She steps forward, each movement deliberate, her gaze fixed on me. Pride and vulnerability flicker across her face. I swallow and hold out my hand. No offering this time, just the silent plea of a man who has learned too late what matters. She stops a few yards away, body relaxed but ready. We hold that space between us, a chasm bridged by something deeper than words. I feel tears welling, and I dare to hope that she understands my remorse, my awe, my gratitude. She blinks once, as if forgiving me for the mistake I can never fully atone for. Then she turns and pads back toward the trees, disappearing into the living sketches of the wild. I stand alone in the dew-soaked grass, heart pounding, breath trembling. The forest exhales around me. I have never felt so alive and so guilty. I woke one morning to silence so deep, it felt like the forest had exhaled its last breath. Winter had draped everything in a heavy blanket of white, and the world seemed to hold its secrets beneath the frost. I stepped outside my cabin, expecting to see those familiar paw prints winding toward the porch, but there was nothing, only fresh snow unmarked, as if no living creature had passed this way for weeks. A hollow ache settled in my chest. For months, their visits had been the pulse in my life, the way the kits tumbled through the drifts, the mother's steady vigilance. Now the clearing was empty, the trough forgotten, the offerings of venison untouched. I wandered among the pine trunks, searching for signs, broken twigs, a smear of blood, a cluster of tracks, but found only pristine snow and my own footprints trailing behind me. My breath puffed in the cold air, and I traced a line of faint tracks near the old oak. I followed them, heart hammering, until they faded beneath a mound of fresh powder. I knelt and brushed snow away, half hoping to uncover a paw or a tuft of fur. Instead, I touched bare earth, cold and unyielding. My fingertips stung as if I had pressed against ice itself. When I stood, the forest felt further away than ever. That night, sleep offered no refuge. I was haunted by dreams of glowing eyes in the darkness. I saw her, Mother Lynx, lying broken as I had first found her, only now the wound was fresh again, crimson against white fur. The kits circled her, crying silent pleas I could not answer. I reached out to touch their fur, but every time my fingers came close, they passed through as though they were made of mist. I woke with tears frozen on my cheeks. In another dream, they appeared at the cabin door, 3 amber shapes framed by the lantern's glow. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound emerged. They blinked at me, then melted back into the night, leaving only the echo of their vanished steps. I bolted upright in bed, heart pounding, convinced I was alone, and terrified that perhaps I truly was. All day I moved with my mind elsewhere, replaying their faces in every shadow. The forest called to me, but I hesitated at the edge of the clearing, afraid I would find nothing again. I remembered how it felt when she first returned with those 2 kits at her side. I remembered the weight of her gaze, the astonishment in her stance. I gripped the sleeve of my coat and whispered, "Where are you?" The forest answered only with the sigh of wind in bare branches. My journals, once filled with sketches of their shapes, now lay neglected on the desk. I opened to the pages and traced the lines of her powerful haunch, but the drawing seemed to mock me with its certainty. I closed the book and pushed it aside. Perhaps I had been foolish to believe it all, this miraculous tale of forgiveness and trust. Perhaps I had dreamed the whole thing. I went to the window, watching as snowflakes drifted down like pale confessions. I found myself longing for their return, for the soft thud of small paws on the porch, for the warmth of living fur against my leg. But each time I thought I heard a rustle, I would freeze, and nothing would follow but my own quickened breath. I tried to convince myself it was just a beautiful dream. I told my reflection in the window that the forest was too harsh for such tenderness, that wild hearts could not be tamed by scraps of meat or whispered apologies. I told myself I had imagined the kits, that the mother had been wounded long ago, lost to memory and myth. I said it over and over. It was just a dream. Yet at dusk, I found my boots already laced, my coat donned, as if summoned by hope. I stepped into the snow again and called her name aloud, Bella, though that was not her real name. I had given her that when I dared to believe. My voice cracked on the air, and I stood listening, chest tight. A branch snapped somewhere beyond the clearing, but it was just a deer, bounding away in fear. I sank to my knees in the snow, face stinging with cold and tears. Sometimes I call her name aloud, just like that. I don't know why. I rose and walked back to the cabin, each footstep a fragile promise. I did not know if I would ever see them again. But as I closed the door against the wind, I felt the emptiness settle beside me, an ache I could not shake, a question that burned. Was their absence real, or had I lost the extraordinary piece of myself that believed in miracles? Spring arrived on silent pause. One morning, I stepped onto my porch, and there she was, alone, older, her coat dulled by time. She sat on the wooden boards, as if born from the dawn mist itself. Not a leaf rustled, not a bird sang, just her, still and solemn. My breath caught. I froze mid-step. I thought I would never see her again. All the months of empty snow and hollow dreams flashed through me. I braced for the ache of loss one last time, but she did not vanish. She simply watched me from where she sat, her head tilted slightly, her eyes gentle but unruly with memory. I set down my coffee mug and slipped off my boots. The old wood creaked beneath my careful weight. I kept my distance, respecting the space between human and wild, yet every fiber of me ached to close it. I remember the first time I found her wounded. I remember the kits by her side. I remember the wolf and the kits that saved me. All of it poured into my chest like sunlight, and here she was again, as if summoned by those moments. I stepped forward. She did not flinch. She did not bolt. She remained perfectly still, as if honoring the weight of our shared history. I sank onto the top step, careful not to jostle the fragile silence. She blinked. I blinked back. Our eyes locked, and the years between us vanished. I whispered her name, though she no longer bore one. "Hello, old friend." No response, only the hush of spring around us. Memories spiraled. That first dawn when she returned with two tiny shapes at her side, the day the adolescent Lynx placed herself between me and death. The nights I lay awake, dreaming of their return, all the times I called into the forest, once in hope, once in despair, and now this moment, far more powerful than any before. I knew this was goodbye. I felt it in the soft tilt of her ears, in the centuries of wild wisdom reflected in her eyes. "I knew I would never see you again," I murmured. She stared, unblinking. The world held its breath. I rose slowly, the wood protesting underfoot. She did not rise. She did not move. She simply stayed, regal and resigned. I swallowed, voice choking. "You came back," I said. "You came to say goodbye." Her eyes softened. A single blink. The moment stretched and fractured. It felt as though the forest itself exhaled with her. She stood then, every muscle poised for departure. Her ribs moved beneath her coat. A breath, then another. She walked toward the edge of the porch and paused. I held my breath. I dared not blink. The distance between us was a riverbed, dry but still dangerous to cross. She turned her head once, looking back at me. Her gaze steady, unwavering. I realized then, this was her farewell. She walked down the steps, placing each paw with deliberate care. Her tail swept softly over the planks. With each step, she seemed to carry away a piece of my heart. When she reached the snow-melted path, she paused again. I thought my heart would stop. It was so silent. She lifted her head one last time. I felt the length of our bond in that single lift. Then she turned and slipped into the pines. I watched until the forest swallowed her form, until only the whisper of her passing remained. I stood alone on the porch, chest tight, tears thawing on my cheeks. The world seemed emptier, but somehow more alive. I understood then what she had taught me. Wildness is fleeting, trust is fragile, and miracles exist at the edge of fear. She came to say goodbye, and I understood it, without words. I never expected that a single series of encounters could unmake a lifetime of certainty. Yet here I stand, months after that spring morning when she came to bid farewell, and everything has shifted beneath my feet. I walk the forest paths now as a humbled guest rather than a confident master. Each snap of a twig, each rustle in the undergrowth feels like a whispered reminder of what I once overlooked. Before I found her wounded in the snow, before the kits appeared at my doorstep, I carried my rifle without a second thought. Hunting was my way of life, the rhythm of tracking, stalking, the precise pull of the trigger. I believed it was the natural order, predator and prey, life measured in the taking. But after I spared her, after I watched her two kits grow strong enough to protect me, something inside me cracked. I realized I could no longer look at a living creature and see only its value as game. I laid down my rifle that morning I first knelt beside her. I have never picked it up again. My fingers no longer crave the cool steel. Instead, they ache to trace the ridges of antlers and the soft tracks of paws. I keep journals now, simple notebooks where I record every sighting of bird or beast, every call echoing through the pines. I note the patterns of migration, the quiet struggle of a deer nursing its fawn, the fierce grace of a fox slipping through twilight. I write in the margins how it feels to witness each moment, as though capturing not just a fact, but a fragment of my own awakening. I have become someone who stops in the middle of a trail to watch a squirrel's bold leap from branch to branch, who pauses at dusk to marvel at the heron standing motionless in the creek, who kneels in the soft earth to feel its cool dampness, as though in that moment I become part of the woodland I once considered merely my hunting ground. I breathe differently now, aware of every inhalation, every exhalation that carries pollen, pine resin, the promise of rain. But most of all, I have learned that animals do not merely survive. They remember, they return. They are capable of gratitude in a way I had never imagined. The mother lynx, once on the brink of death, came back not powerless, but triumphant, with a legacy of 2 kits who learned from her courage. They remembered the kindness I showed her, and in turn, they showed me what compassion truly means. When the adolescent stood between me and the wolf, I felt the full weight of their memory. She remembered the day I spared her mother's life, and she repaid me with her own. I have told a few people in town that I have given up hunting. Some scoff, unable to see the logic or the magic in my choice. They ask if I've lost my mind, if I still believe a wild creature would ever think to thank a human. I tell them the story, halting at the part where the kits pressed their small faces against my boots. I watch their eyes widen when I describe how the mother blinked at me before slipping away into the shadows, and some whisper that I'm poetic, others say I'm foolish. But I know what I saw. My days now are filled with the slow work of the land. I tend a small garden where I grow vegetables for the local market. I leave patches of wildflower and milkweed untended, a sanctuary for bees and butterflies. I build birdhouses and check them each morning, marveling at the chirping tenants. I hollow out a fallen log to serve as a bat roost, because bats, too, deserve safe havens. I do these things not for profit, not for praise, but because I learned that every creature, no matter how small, carries a story worth preserving. I speak less now. My speech was once measured in tales of pursuit, the thrill of the chase. Now my words are quieter, laced with reverence. When I see a doe with her fawn, I offer a soft greeting, as though acknowledging an old friend. When I wander at twilight and hear the call of an owl, I lift my gaze to the treetops and nod in silent greeting. It feels fitting to commune with these voices of the wild, for they taught me the truth, that life is not a commodity, but a miracle. Sometimes, standing at the edge of the clearing where she first met my gaze, I speak aloud to her memory. I confess my fears, my regrets, my hopes. "Thank you," I whisper. "I'm sorry," I murmur, and in the hush that follows, I like to imagine her spirit, old, wise, forgiving, lingering among the pines. I know the lynx of my youth has aged beyond return, but her lessons endure in every rustle of leaf and flicker of tail. I have come to believe that the greatest gift we can give the wild is our respect, our wonder, our willingness to listen. And perhaps, in rare moments, that gift is acknowledged. Perhaps another creature, somewhere in the dim hush of the forest, senses our gratitude and responds in kind. I cannot prove it scientifically. I have no measurements, no data charts, only the echo of her amber eyes. I pause now by the porch railing, my hand resting on the worn wood as spring light filters through budding branches. I close my eyes and breathe deeply. Earth, pine, hope. My heart is full with the echo of everything I have learned. In my mind's eye, I see her one last time, solitary, serene, stepping back into the fold of ancient trees. They say such things do not happen. They say the wild does not remember kindness. They say we cannot know the hearts of beasts. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And even now, I cannot shake the memory of her forgiving gaze. Such a thing cannot happen, I whisper to the empty air, but I saw it with my own eyes, and to this day I still cannot believe. She forgave me. If your heart is full of wonder, type "nature is wiser than us." A wild bear cub came to a human village, not to eat, not to escape, but to ask for help. What happened next left even the forest silent. When I first saw him at the edge of the village, I caught my breath because I realized he didn't come here by accident. I had woken before dawn, the chill of early morning brushing against my skin, as I stepped onto the creaking wooden porch of my little cottage. At 60, retired and alone, my days began with the steady routine of feeding my chickens and tending the small garden I'd planted near the fence. But that morning, something felt different. An electric stillness lingered in the air, and when I glanced past the worn picket fence, I froze. There, barely 10 yards away, stood a cub, a bear cub, dirty and scrawny, its fur matted with mud and tangled grass. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. He didn't growl or scamper back into the woods. He simply stood, trembling ever so slightly, and watched me. Fear lanced through me. I'd read stories of cubs who'd wander close to humans, lost and desperate, but I never imagined I'd find myself face to face with one. My hands curled into fists on the railing. My mind raced. Should I slam the door and call for help? Should I scare him off? But his eyes, those dark, glassy eyes, held something I couldn't ignore. A plea, not wild hunger or instinctual panic, but a raw, human-like longing. He shifted his weight, each step deliberate and unhurried. My breath caught again. How could a creature so fierce show such vulnerability? I fought the urge to back away, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. His gaze never wavered. Then he sat, right there, on his haunches, paws folded neatly before him. It was as if he understood that, to be heard, he had to wait. He didn't pace. He didn't whimper. He just waited, silent and patient, commanding more attention than any roar ever could. My chest tightened. 1,000 thoughts surged and died in an instant. What if his mother was injured? What if he was starving? What if I moved too suddenly and provoked him? My fingers trembled on the railing. Never had I felt so small, so unprepared. He cocked his head, watching me with those imploring eyes. A single droplet of dawn light caught in his fur, illuminating the sadness etched across his tiny muzzle. My rational mind clamored, "This is a wild animal. Get back, stay safe." But my heart ached. I whispered a shaky greeting, voice cracking in the quiet morning. "Hey there, little one." My words seemed too soft, too hushed for such an impossible scene. Yet somehow, they reached him. His ears twitched. He blinked as though acknowledging my presence. A thread of connection wove between us, one that felt older than any language, deeper than any fear. Time slowed. The sun crept higher, unveiling more of the world around us, the dew-drenched grass, the silent chicken coop, the empty road that led to the forest. And still he waited. I wanted to help, to shoo him inside, to feed him, anything to ease that desperate look. I climbed down from the porch and took a cautious step forward. The cub didn't flinch. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I extended a trembling hand. Just a gesture, no threat. He sniffed the air, then lowered his head slightly. I froze, breathless, waiting. The world held its breath with me. But then, he turned away. My pulse sank. He rose and padded back toward the trees, each step deliberate. My chest ached with relief and regret. Relief that he seemed unhurt, regret that I hadn't reached him in time. I exhaled, the tension ebbing from my shoulders. I watched until he vanished into the gloom of the forest's edge. The morning returned to its routine sounds. Birds chirping, wind rustling leaves, a distant rooster crowing. I blinked, still anchored at the fence, expecting, what? A sign? A thank you? Anything? I shook my head, rubbing my fists against my thighs. My heart was still racing. I searched the tree line, half expecting the cub to reappear, to call me back. But there was nothing, only the silent woods and my own thunderous breathing. I clambered back onto the porch and sank into the old rocking chair, legs trembling. The regular rhythm of the chair was grounding, but my mind spun with questions. Why had he come? Why had he trusted me, even for a moment? My chest clenched, the echo of his gaze lingering like an ember. Sunlight filtered around me now, painting the world in gold. The moment slipped into memory, but its weight stayed with me. I rubbed my eyes as if waking from a dream. Could I have imagined it? Could a wild creature really show such consciousness, such need? I reached for my pocket watch, an old heirloom that hadn't ticked in years. I flipped it open, maybe in hope that it would confirm time had moved forward. Instead, it hung on the chain, silent. The world felt suspended. I thought that was it. Just a lost cub passing through, a strange encounter at dawn, a brush with nature that would fade like morning mist. I leaned back, pressing my palms to the wood of the rocking chair, trying to steady my racing thoughts, but deep inside, something told me this was only the beginning. I tried everything to scare him off. I waved my arms, shouted words I'd learned in wildlife pamphlets, and even banged a metal bucket against the fence posts. Yet, he didn't flinch. He simply sat there, mud caking his fur, eyes locked onto mine with a calm intensity that made my chest squeeze. I thought that if I could just make enough noise, he'd bolt back into the woods. But he didn't. He didn't even blink. He never touched the bowl of oats I'd scattered near the porch, nor did he paw at the trash I'd piled as bait. There was no growl, no desperate scratching for scraps, just that unwavering gaze. Every time I took a step toward the house for help, he remained still, as if rooted to the spot. My breath hitched, and I realized with a jolt that fear had curled its sharp claws around my throat. Then, unexpectedly, he rose. Slow, deliberate, almost graceful. My heart thundered. Was he going to charge? But instead of bristling his fur or letting out a roar, he walked toward the edge of the clearing, each padded step echoing in the silent dawn. He paused, turned his head, and looked back at me. He looked at me as if I were one of his own, as if he was pleading, "Come with me." I froze, torn between the impulse to retreat and the bubbling curiosity that surged through me. His eyes held no malice, no confusion, only what felt like an earnest beckoning. My mind raced. Why would a wild cub want me to follow? Was it trapped? Was there someone else out there? I took a cautious step forward. He took one step further into the trees. The space between us shrank by inches, yet I felt as though I'd never been further from safety. I wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans, imagining every horror scenario: poisoned trap, wounded mother lying in wait, a clan of bears ready to defend their young. But none of those horrific possibilities played out. Instead, when I hesitated again, he pressed on, head down, ears sliding back in the most human gesture of urging. He was confident, unafraid of me, unafraid of what lay beyond the tree line, and I found myself obeying, drawn by a force I couldn't name. We crossed the old picket fence together, him slipping under the broken boards, me climbing over with a dull creak. Leaves crunched beneath my boots as I followed him down the narrow deer path that wound into the heart of the forest. Birdsong drifted overhead, but it felt distant, as if nature itself had hushed to watch. At first, every snap of a twig made me jump. My senses were on high alert, shapes shifting in the underbrush, shadows that might be predators, the faint scent of pine and damp soil. Yet the cub never glanced back in fear. He moved steadily, pausing now and then to look at me, as if to ask, "Are you still with me?" I nodded, though he couldn't see. My throat was tight, but I managed to whisper, "I'm here." It felt like the most natural thing in the world, even as my rational mind screamed that I was risking everything. The deeper we went, the thicker the trees grew. Sunlight speckled the mossy floor in golden patches, and I realized I'd never noticed how serene this part of the woods could be. The cub led me over a fallen log and through a small clearing where dew glistened on ferns. I bent to brush the droplets off a blade of grass and looked up. He was watching me again, head tilted. He turned, and I followed. Then he paused at a strangely arranged pile of stones. My pulse leapt. Was this an animal den? A sacred shrine of the forest? He sniffed the stones, then lifted a paw to tap the largest one. The gesture was gentle, reverent, as if he acknowledged something I'd overlooked. I swallowed hard. What did this mean? Was he showing me something important? A memory? A warning? My chest tightened with anticipation. I took another step, ready to kneel and listen to whatever message he brought. But then, like a sigh in the wind, he turned once more and padded ahead, leaving me to my questions. I watched his silhouette merge with the greenery, heart thrumming with a mix of awe and unease. I decided he was just a wild creature who'd lost his mother. I swallowed hard and took a step forward, then another, until I found myself fully committed, following that scrawny cub into the heart of the forest. My rational mind screamed at me to turn back, but each time I glanced over my shoulder at the empty clearing, I felt a pang of guilt, as if I'd abandoned someone in dire need. So I pressed on. The moment we passed beneath the arching birches, sound fell away. Birdsong silenced. The whisper of wind through leaves stilled. It was as if the forest itself had hushed, watching us with bated breath. My footsteps on the pine needle carpet sounded loud enough to wake the dead. I could feel my pulse in my temples, every nerve alive with tension. My fear pulsed first. What if this was a trap? Wolves or the cub's mother lying in ambush? My breath came in short gasps, and I tightened my jacket around me, half expecting claws to tear through the fabric. But the cub pressed on, confident, his little claws making soft, scratching sounds on the mossy ground. He never faltered, never sniffed the air in alarm. He moved with purpose, as though he knew exactly where he was going. A shiver of awe rippled through me. This tiny creature, barely bigger than a large dog, had a command over this wild place that I could only envy. My eyes followed him as he navigated a tangle of roots without hesitation, slipped under a fallen birch, and bounded over a low-hanging branch. Doubt flickered next. Maybe I was hallucinating? Maybe the cub was leading me to my doom, and I'd be found days later, half-eaten? I stifled the thought and forced my legs to keep moving. My chest tightened when the path narrowed, and the trees hemmed us in so closely I could feel the damp bark alongside my arm. Yet I found myself trusting him, trusting that this little wild thing with his deep, imploring eyes was guiding me somewhere I needed to be. My heart swelled with gratitude for his silent leadership and for the mercy he seemed to extend by not turning back. Then, abruptly, he stopped. I almost ran into him, so sudden was his halt, and he turned his head toward a massive, uprooted oak. Its roots crowned the air like a fan, thick tendrils knotted together and dripping with soil. The cub padded forward and raised a front paw, then raked at the earth beneath the roots. His claws scraped dirt, stones, and broken wood. He worked with a frenzy I'd never seen, each motion urgent, fierce. A low rumble grew at the back of my throat, part fear, part wonder. The cub let out a sharp, keening whine that echoed through the hollow. My blood ran cold. His cry sounded so human, so desperate. It was as if he was summoning something or crying out for what had been stolen from him. My chest constricted. I had to step closer, but my legs trembled. I crouched at the edge of the upturned root ball and peered into the dark cavity beneath. Shadows pooled among the tangled roots, and I strained to see. Was there another cub trapped down there? A hidden den blocked by the giant tree's fall? My breath caught as I imagined the worst. The cub's mother crushed under the weight, her final moments spent guarding her offspring. But then, nothing stirred. No other shape emerged from the gloom. My throat tightened with relief, but the cub's frantic digging continued. He bared his teeth in a vicious snarl that cut against his usual silent sadness. My hands flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. Never had I seen such ferocious protectiveness in such a small animal. I dropped to my knees and reached out, placing a tentative hand on the edge of the roots. "Hold on, little one," I whispered, voice quivering. The cub paused, lifted his head, and stared at my palm, as though seeking comfort. In that moment, the forest felt endless and infinite, my fear and the cub's sorrow merging into a single ache. Seconds stretched into minutes. My mind buzzed with questions I'd never imagined asking a wild creature. What were you doing down there? Who are you saving? But the cub only resumed digging, softer this time, as if he knew I was there to help. My heart swelled with compassion, and I sifted soil aside with trembling fingers, revealing tangled roots and stones. I thought he was simply playing, his youthful exuberance translating to frantic wrestling with the earth. I thought he'd tire soon, then turn away and let me return him to the safety of my porch, where food and shelter awaited. I thought this would be the end of our journey together, a wild cub's playful dance in the dirt, a harmless morning adventure. But as I watched the cub's determined efforts, I realized how wrong I was. This was no play. This was something far deeper, something I wasn't prepared for. And though I forced myself to whisper reassurances, my heart pounded with the understanding that this path we'd taken was only just beginning. I edged closer, every nerve in my body screaming to turn back, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. Beneath the gnarled roots of the fallen oak lay something I never expected. A massive adult bear, her fur matted with earth, her massive form pinned by the weight of the tree. She was still, her rise and fall of breath gone silent. My heart hammered so fiercely, I feared it would echo through the hushed forest like a drumbeat of mourning. Beside her, curled in a ragged heap, was another cub, smaller even than the first, his flank heaving in slow, shallow gasps. He lay on his side, ribs visible under gray fur slick with blood and sweat. My throat constricted, hot tears springing unbidden to my eyes. The cub I'd followed here wasn't playing at all. He had been leading me to this terrible scene. "He brought me to save his brother," I whispered, voice catching on the grief that weighed down my chest. I dropped to my knees beside him, my hands trembling as I reached out. The cub lifted his head, eyes glazed but flickering with a spark of recognition when they found mine. He pushed his nose against my palm, a weak nudge that carried all the urgency of a desperate plea. "Help me." Tears slid down my cheeks as I pressed my fingers against the cub's cheek. My own fear melted into helpless sorrow. I'd never cried for the suffering of a wild animal before, never let grief shatter the barrier between human and beast. But here, in this silent cathedral of broken wood and shattered roots, I could do nothing but weep. I glanced back at the mother, her massive paw protruding from the dirt, her claws dulled by the earth that held her fast. I closed my eyes, inhaled, and forced my thoughts into action. Gently, I cradled the cub in my arms and rose unsteadily to my feet. He was so small, so fragile, I could almost cup him in one hand. I laid him on a patch of moss outside the root ball, where light filtered through the canopy in soft shards. His breathing remained shallow, but the rise and fall of his chest gave me hope. I looked around for anything that might help, branches to lever the roots, rocks to shift the weight, but fear and uncertainty clouded my judgment. The cub whimpered, a thin, broken sound that tore at my soul. He turned his head toward his mother's motionless form, eyes shining with a fierce love that no human could deny. I realized then that he was too weak to guide me further, that my presence here was the only lifeline he had left. He curled into my side, pressing his small body against my leg as if drawing strength from me. My heart clenched with a mix of terror and mercy. I pressed my cheek to his warm, quivering fur. "I've got you," I choked out. "I won't let you be alone." For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the cub's faint gasps and my ragged sobs. Then a wind stirred, rustling the remaining leaves overhead, and the forest exhaled. It was as if nature itself recognized my vow and held its breath in solemn solidarity. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and swallowed past the lump in my throat. The cub needed warmth, nourishment, care. I scanned the forest floor and spotted a fallen birch branch, sturdy and long enough to pry at the earth. Gripping it with both hands, I wedged it under a thick root and heaved. The branch trembled, then gave way, cracking the root free. One by one I shifted roots and stones, each movement sending dust into the air. My arms burned, my back screamed in protest, but I pressed on, fueled by the cub's soft whimpers and the memory of his pleading eyes. Finally, with a final desperate yank, I loosened the heaviest root. It fell away with a thud, leaving a space just wide enough to glimpse the mother bear's wounded form. My throat tightened. I couldn't reach her now. Her injury was too grave, her spirit too broken. But the cub, his chance remained. I scooped him into my jacket, cradling him as if he were my own child. He nestled into my chest, warily and gratefully, resting his head on my collarbone. I took a trembling step backward, then another, until I reached the forest's edge. The cub's body was shockingly light, skeletal, but his heartbeat fluttered against my chest, a fragile affirmation of life. I broke into a run, guided by instinct and the cub's faint warmth against me. Once clear of the fallen tree, I slowed, lowered myself to the ground, and laid him gently on a bed of ferns. His breath was more labored now, but it was there. I patted his side, offering the softest comfort I could muster. "Hang on," I whispered. "I'll get help." I promised. Tears blurred my vision as I tore through the undergrowth, racing back to the safety of the village, and the faint hope that medicine and human kindness could tip the scales in this small creature's favor. Yet even as adrenaline carried me forward, a piece of my heart stayed behind, with two bears caught in the ruins of a fallen oak, one gone forever, the other clinging to the slimmest thread of hope. I thought rescuing this cub would be the end of my journey, a simple act of compassion. I thought this was the moment our story would close. But as the forest swallowed my hurried steps, I felt the weight of what had just begun, and I knew nothing would ever be the same. I carried him through the dim light of late afternoon, cradled against my chest like a trembling child. His breathing was ragged, each breath a struggle. I felt every labored inhale as if it were my own. By the time I reached the rickety barn at the edge of my property, dusk had settled in, and the world felt small and quiet. I laid a thick blanket on the straw-covered floor and gently eased the cub down. He trembled, but when I brushed his fur with a gentle hand, he pressed closer, seeking warmth. I fetched a shallow metal dish of warm milk, but he didn't reach for it. His eyes, heavy with pain, remained half-closed. I returned to the porch and called softly, "Come on out," half expecting him to bolt back into the night. Instead, from the tree line came the cub I had first encountered, the one who led me here. He padded forward, ears alert but calm, and when he reached the barn's doorway, he paused. His gaze flicked between me and the injured cub. Then, without hesitation, he stepped inside. He lowered himself into the straw beside his brother, body tense with watchful concern. He laid his head gently on the smaller cub's back, an unspoken promise that he would stay. I shut the barn door and latched it, the click echoing in the stillness. Inside, the two cubs lay close together, their breathing steady, a fragile rhythm of life. For a moment, I simply stood there, unmoving, as tears welled in my eyes. These were wild creatures, untamed, dangerous, but right now, they were just two frightened orphans who needed shelter. I turned and closed the door, leaving them to the dim lantern light. That night, sleep eluded me. I sat by the open doorway, listening to their breath. Each inhale and exhale felt like a miracle. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, But inside the barn, there was only the soft rustle of straw and the even breathing of brothers clinging to life. I thought about how fragile everything was. A fallen tree had torn their world apart. A human had saved them from its wreckage. I felt the weight of that responsibility in every thump of my heart. When the first light of dawn filtered through the cracks in the barn walls, I crept inside, expecting the cub who guided me to slip away as soon as he saw the open door. I had planned to carry the injured cub to the wildlife rescue, his only hope for proper care, and then send the older one back to the forest. But the moment our eyes met, he shifted his massive paws and rose to his feet. He padded to the open door and looked out, as if weighing his options. Then he turned back to me, sat on his haunches, and tilted his head. His eyes were clear. He chose to stay. My chest tightened. He wasn't here for the food I'd left in a tin bowl out on the porch. He wasn't here for easy shelter. He stayed for his brother, and, somehow, for me. A warm swell of emotion rose in my throat. He stayed not for the milk, not for the safety, I whispered, voice hushed with wonder. He stayed for his brother, for memory, for me? He gave a quiet sigh and settled back onto the straw, brushing his brother's ear with a gentle nudge. It was gratitude wrapped in fur, a gesture so tender it brought tears to my eyes. I knelt beside them and placed a hand on the older cub's broad shoulder. His coarse fur scratched my palm, but it felt like the softest blessing. I thought again of that first morning, how he'd sat at the fence under that impossible dawn, as if seeking me out. And now here he was, refusing to leave, determined to guard his family and protect our strange bond. I believed, in that moment, that this reprieve would be temporary. Soon, I'd drive to the rescue center with the injured cub, hand him over to veterinarians, and set the older one free to return to his true home. I pictured him slipping once more into the shadows between the trees, his duty done. But as I watched them huddle together, I realized how wrong I was. This wasn't a fleeting gesture. This was a choice, a wild force of nature, making a human decision to stand by me as I'd stood by them. My hand tightened on his shoulder, and I leaned closer, inhaling the faint, sweet scent of forest pine clinging to his fur. "You're welcome here," I murmured, my voice thick with emotion. "Both of you." He closed his eyes, accepting my words with a slow, trusting nod. The injured cub stirred and nuzzled his brother's side. In that shared warmth, fear and uncertainty melted away. I stepped back into the faint light of dawn, heart pounding with the enormity of what lay ahead. I had thought I'd offered them a moment's shelter, but they had offered me something greater, a glimpse of loyalty and love that transcended species, a reminder that kinship can be found in the most unexpected places. I left them there, brothers bound by survival and gratitude, and walked back to my cottage. My mind raced with plans, vet visits, permits, long-term care, but my spirit remained anchored to the barn. Things would never be simple again, and I, for one, would never be the same. A few mornings later, when the mist still clung to the pines and I was helping the cub brother to his feet, I sensed that familiar tug, a silent beckoning I could no longer ignore. He paused at the barn door, turned his head, and looked at me with those knowing eyes. Then he slipped away, disappearing into the forest as if to say, "Come with me again." My pulse raced. I gathered my jacket and followed without hesitation, heart thundering between fear and awe. The forest was hushed, the path carpeted in moss that muffled my steps. Every snapped twig held the weight of possibility, wonder or danger. Yet the cub moved confidently, confident that I would follow. We rounded a bend in the trail and entered a small clearing. Sunlight pierced the branches, spotlighting something at the far edge. There, lying among ferns and fallen leaves, was a she-bear. My blood froze. Her flank was dark with dried blood, her breathing shallow and uneven. Around her neck hung a necklace, one I had carved myself decades ago and hung on a low branch to ward off poachers when I'd first rescued her. I swallowed hard, chest tightening. Could it be her? The same bear I'd coaxed from a snare when I was a young game warden, her paw shredded, her trust earned in trembling moments of care. I'd never believed she survived the winter storms that followed, yet there she lay, alive but broken, the pendant I'd made clasped firmly around her neck. Tears brimmed in my eyes as I knelt beside her. She lifted her head, pupils wide with recognition. For a heartbeat, time stopped. I placed a trembling hand on her coarse fur, feeling the faint pulse beneath. My voice caught. "I thought you were gone." She closed her eyes, then opened them again and blinked slow, and in that moment I felt the deepest gratitude pulse through me. It was her children. She remembered and brought me back to herself. Behind me the cub waited, silent sentinel. His eyes shone with relief. He nuzzled his mother's side as if confirming she was truly here. My heart swelled with awe. This was more than rescue or repayment. This was a bond forged in kindness and memory, stretching across years and seasons. I reached into my pocket and produced a small water flask, offering it to her muzzle. She drank carefully, tilting her head back, eyes never leaving mine. Every sip seemed to strengthen her. I knelt in the dappled light, brushing loose pine needles from her fur and murmuring soft encouragements. The cub brother curled beside her, resting his head on her massive paw, and she leaned into him with a gentle sigh. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe the worst was over. I imagined lifting her onto a makeshift stretcher, carrying her back to my barn, nursing her until she could return to the wild. I pictured the three of them wandering free, mother and two cubs, a reunited family in the vast forest. But then she lifted her head and let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through my bones. It wasn't a warning or a threat. It was a declaration. This was where she belonged now. I realized she didn't need my help to leave the forest. She needed me to witness this moment, to acknowledge the depth of her gratitude. She had survived on her own strength, returned by her own will. My throat clenched with emotion. I had given her a chance once, and she had never forgotten. Now her gesture repaid me in kind, bringing me to this clearing, to the living proof that the smallest act of mercy can echo through a lifetime. I rose slowly, brushing tears from my cheeks. The she-bear shifted, pushing herself upright on bleeding paw. The cub stood beside her, forming a trembling triangle of reunion and resilience. The mother dipped her head in a solemn bow, as if offering her thanks in the only way she could. I stepped back, voice thick with wonder. "Go home," I whispered. "Find yourselves out there." She sniffed the air, turned, and led her cubs deeper into the forest, disappearing among the birches as silently as she had appeared. I remained in the clearing long after they were gone, heart pounding with reverence. The necklace lay in the grass where I had unhooked it, glinting like a promise. I picked it up, fingers trembling. I didn't know nature could remember like this. I slipped the pendant onto a nearby branch, where the morning light caught its silver in a single beam. Then I turned and walked back along the mossy path, each step echoing with the memory of what I'd seen, and what I would never forget. I followed the two cubs as they padded silently into the shadowed forest, the morning sun filtering through the canopy in golden beams. The older brother moved with confident strides, glancing back once to make sure I was still there. The younger, though frail, kept pace, each breath steadier than before, each step surer. My chest tightened with relief and awe. They were both strong enough now to face the wild on their own. I watched them slip between the trunks of ancient pines, their little bodies illuminated in patches of light and shadow. The forest seemed to exhale around us, as though honoring this moment of reunion and release. My heart swelled, certain that this was the end of my part in their story, that they would vanish into the green world forever, free and whole. I thought it was their final farewell, but then the older cub halted. The smaller one twitched beside him, as if waiting for guidance. The first cub turned slowly, eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. He rose onto his hind legs, towering, awkward, yet full of dignity, and planted a heavy paw against my chest. The press of his clawed foot was gentle, deliberate. A silent message burned into my skin. He wasn't protecting territory or marking me as prey. He was saying thank you. In that instant, the weight of everything crashed over me. Dawn's hush, the fallen oak, the grief and the rescue, the nights spent listening to raspy breaths in my barn. And here, in this gesture of gratitude from a wild creature, I felt a swell of emotion so fierce it brought tears to my eyes. He showed me something that changed my entire life. If your heart is racing right now, you understand. Subscribe to the channel. Here we tell the truth about nature's mysteries. The cub held his paw for a heartbeat longer, as if imprinting that moment on my soul, then gently hopped down. He nudged his brother, turned as one, and padded away into the silent woods. Their silhouettes dissolved among the trees, leaving me standing alone, hand pressed to the spot where his paw had rested. I remained still, the forest's quiet wrapping around me, as though sharing its secret. My chest heaved with the echo of his gift, and I realized I would carry that moment forever, proof that gratitude knows no language, no boundaries. When I finally walked back towards the village, the world felt both larger and more intimate than ever before. I knew I'd never look at the forest, or at any wild creature, the same way again. When I returned to the clearing where the fallen oak had claimed her life, the forest was silent in a way that felt sacred. Shafts of sunlight pierced the canopy, spotlighting a single silver glint high in the branches. There it hung, my old pendant, the one I'd carved and placed years ago to protect her from poachers. Against all reason, nature had returned it to me. My fingers tingled as I reached up, plucking the necklace from its perch. The cool metal felt impossibly weighty in my palm, a tangible proof of everything I'd witnessed. I stood there, breath caught in my throat, as memories flooded back. The image of the she-bear's trusting eyes when I first freed her paw from that cruel snare, the cub's trembling reunion, and the elder brother's gentle paw pressed to my chest in silent gratitude. I closed my eyes and heard, as clearly as if she spoke them in that very moment, the words I'd whispered long ago. If you understand, come back someday. I'd thought them a forlorn hope murmured to the woods, yet here was the answer, glinting among the leaves. A rush of disbelief surged through me. Wild creatures, untamed by nature's fiercest laws, remembered kindness. They felt love. They repaid compassion with gestures that transcended instinct. My rational mind balked. This defied everything I'd been taught, but my heart pounded with the undeniable truth of what I held. I knelt on the mossy ground, brushing loose pine needles aside, as if unveiling a hidden altar. Around me, the scent of earth and sap seemed richer, deeper, like the forest itself exhaling in wonder. The pendant's chain swung lightly in the breeze, casting dancing reflections on the fern-fringed earth. Each sparkle felt like a message. You are not alone. You were heard. Tears blurred my vision. I remembered how I'd scooped the injured cub into my arms, how his tiny lungs had fluttered against my chest as if begging for life. I remembered that first cub's unwavering gaze at my fence at dawn, compelling me to follow. And now I understood the full circle. The mother had returned the gift I gave her, trusting me again after all these years. My breath caught as I pictured her massive form stepping through the trees, the cubs trailing at her side, every muscle rippling with renewed strength. She had faced trials and returned not for refuge or food, but to honor the bond we formed. In that moment, the forest became a living testament to reciprocity, every leaf, every bird call a witness. I rose slowly, clasping the pendant to my chest. My knees felt weak, as though the forest's gravity held me in place. The world beyond seemed distant, a village I barely recognized. Here, among these towering pines, I discovered a truth more profound than any human promise, that kindness can echo across lifetimes, that gratitude needs no words. If someone had told me this story, I would never have believed it. I would have smiled politely, chalked it up to fancy, but I saw it with my own eyes. I felt it in my bones. And with each sunrise since, I wake to the thought that nature is wiser than we think, and kinder. I pocketed the pendant and turned toward the path leading home, every step light with wonder. The forest's hush followed me, an invisible blessing. Birds began to sing again, and the world reawoke around me. Yet I walked on, carrying the quiet miracle in my heart. If your heart is now full of awe, write, nature is wiser than us.